Okay, this is a quick demonstration of exercise 1, creating components in visual web design. So the first thing I'm going to do is make a copy of the project template from the Start Here project, because this is a nice setup for every project or exercise that we're going to do in this class. So the way I'm going to do that is to right click on the project template and click duplicate. And then I'm going to take this copy of that file and I'm going to throw it in whatever exercise or project folder that we are doing at the moment. In this case, it's this exercise 1 components folder. So after I do that, if I switch to this project, I can come in here and open this up and then rename it something sensible instead of copy. So I'll just name it my name. I'll fill this out so that it makes sense. And then I'm going to hop into the components page because in this exercise what we're making are components. Okay, so in exercise 1 what I'm asking you to make are buttons. To get started doing that, I'm going to grab the frame tool, which is this kind of cross shape up here, or you can hit the F button on your keyboard. And there's a reason that we're using the frame tool instead of the rectangle tool, which I'll get to in just a second. So let's go ahead and draw out a rectangle shape for our button. I'm going to zoom in here by holding Command and then using my mouse wheel so we can get a better look at this. So this frame is essentially an artboard. Frames keep things inside of them, kind of like an artboard hosts objects in Illustrator. Unlike Illustrator, once I select this frame, you can see that I have the properties over here in the right properties panel, and I can actually adjust the fill color of the frame directly here. So I'm going to adjust this color to be the color of the background of my button. So I'm going to pick a bright blue here. And while I have this open, I'm going to go ahead and add auto layout to this frame. What auto layout is a setting that tells the frame how to react to content within it, as well as how the content within the frame should react to each other. But for our sake, this is really just going to kind of demonstrate how the frame can resize to fit the button. So if I hit plus here, you'll see I get some options, and you can see that it says hug content here, which is great. So I'm going to grab my text tool, and you'll see what that means in just a second here. So if I click and drag out, you'll see as I'm making that text box, the size of the frame is resizing to fit whatever that text frame is going to be. Whoa, that text is way too big. Let's put that down to something sensible. Even 20 is pretty large. Okay. So another thing I'll show you here is you can see how this text wrapped because it was too large for the frame. We have the text box set when we click and drag out to a fixed size, but you'll see if I flip this over to auto width, that text box is going to stretch to be whatever size it needs to be to fit the text on one line. And then the frame is going to resize around it. So to give you another demonstration of that, you'll see as I delete stuff, the frame shrinks down, and then as I type, the frame grows around it, which is super handy when you are using components. Okay, so this is starting to look a little more like a button. The frame here, you'll see as I hover over here what we have around the edges, so what determines the space between the content and the edge of the frame is what's called padding. So you can adjust those values here individually, but you can also do it over here in the auto layout menu. So you can see that we have gaps on the vertical padding. So as I change that, the spacing above and below the text changes. and then the horizontal padding does the same on the left and the right. And then if I wanted to reshape this, maybe to make it a little more friendly, I could round the corners up here to make this like a pill-shaped button. And this is starting to look a lot more like something you would see on a website. Okay, so let's say this is what I want the buttons on my website to look like. To get more of these, I could theoretically copy paste it as much as I need to get more, or use Option and click and drag out. But that is tedious, and then if we make a change to, say, the style of our button, we would have to make that change everywhere. So this is where components come in, and what a component is it essentially tells Figma, hey, this is a template for a type of object or component that I want to use later on. It's kind of like a master file for our button here. So if I select that frame, you'll see above I have this icon that says Create Component, and if I click that, I get this purple frame around it. And so that is the master or main version of the component, and it'll show up over here in my Assets panel. And so I could insert what are called instances of this anywhere I wanted to. And the nice part here is if I make changes to the master, so say for example, I want to change the color to green. If I change the color on that master component, it changes the color everywhere, and so I don't have to go around and find all my buttons and change them there. So this allows you to work a little smarter instead of harder. So I'm going to delete these here. The other thing that components allow us to do, and actually before I do that, the very first thing I'm going to do is rename this. As you start to get larger files, renaming your components and layers is super important so you can actually find what you're working on. So components allow us to have different states of that object. So for something like a button, you could imagine there are other states that that button could be in. So for example, on a desktop, when you hover over something, typically you get like a hover animation, or it slightly changes color to tell you that that is something you can interact with. There's a way to tell Figma that each of those designs, or that we can have multiple designs for that one component, but they're all different states of the same thing. And the way that we do that is we give it what are called properties within variants. So a variant is another version of the button. And when you select your master component, where we found our create component icon, we now have add variant. If I click add variant, you'll see I get a dotted purple line, and I get another copy of it. And over here in my layers panel, you'll see that this says variant 2, and then my first one becomes the default. The other change that happened was over in our properties panel, we got these two new panels that say parent component button, and then current variant, we have property 1, variant 2. If I click on the default component, you'll see it's property 1 and default. These are versatile, but it's really helpful for us to name these something sensible that makes sense. So for the example of a button, I'm going to rename property to state, and then default is fine for this. But when I jump down to variant 2, you'll see the property is state, and we are going to make this the hover version of the button, or focus is the term for it. You'll see that also renamed our variants over here on the left. So now, if I make changes to this variant, let's say this blue gets slightly lighter. We want it to be a slightly lighter blue when the user hovers over it or something. Actually, that's becoming a little more purple, but you get the idea. So we have these two versions of the button. If I create an instance of this, either by option dragging out, this gives me an instance of the component, or again, I can go to Assets, click on the component, and I can insert an instance of this, but you'll see I now have the state. So I can insert the focus state of this button or the default state. If I insert that focus state, I get the focus state of the button, as you might imagine. And I can also change those by flipping the state drop-down over here. So that becomes really handy as you're making mock-ups and want to show various states of components in your designs. So that is all you need to know to actually make the components. I'm going to show you one other thing, which is prototyping components, which you do not have to do in this exercise. So the prototype tab, you'll see we've been in design mode so far. But if I click on prototype, you'll see that some of my options go away. So for example, I have all these properties if I have this selected. But if I click prototype, I lose all of those things, and suddenly I have some other stuff to work with. The main thing to pay attention to here are these blue plus signs around the objects that I have selected. And what those are points to link to another object. So we've been talking about these two variants as different states of the same button. So what I can do is click and drag on that and link the default state to the focus state. And when I do that, I get this flyout context menu that makes some guesses about what I want to happen here. So it says on click, change to the state focus. So if you click on click, you'll have all these different options for what type of interaction should trigger this change. I actually want this to be while hovering. So while someone is hovering over this button, I want the state to change to, so I got that correct, the focus state. So that is correct. And then you'll see, I'm just going to add myself a instance of this button over here and start a flow point, which just says, hey, start the prototype here. But this is just to show you what happens here. So Figma's loading this up. Ooh, that's pretty small. But you'll see when I mouse over that button in the prototype, it changes states, which is exactly what we wanted it to do. Now, let's go back to what it thought we wanted to do at first. So this is now while hovering, but if we had this on click, we would have to do some more work, because if I click on this, I go to the focus state, but there's no way for me to get back. So what I would have to do in that case is then link from the focus state back to the default state, and then on click change back to the default state. And now you'll see when I click on the button, it swaps back and forth between the default state and the focus state. But for now, I'm going to leave that on. I'm going to delete this this connection, and I'm going to leave this on while hovering, because that is what makes sense for a button changing states on hovering. Okay, so that should get you started on how to create components, also a basic intro on auto layout and how that adjusts the frame size to the content within it. We will talk a little bit more about auto layout and what else that can do in the future.